Welcome to another one of our videos where today I'm going to be talking about squats and discussing the question of toes in versus toes out. Alright, so let's get into it. There's arguments for both sides of this. My stance on this is sort of in between, which is probably a lot of the very educated people working with this would also be on the same page. However, you do get a lot of people saying it must be toes in, you've got to be parallel, and I'm going to go over why that's not really a good philosophy to have. But more or less, to sum up this entire video in 5 seconds, I will use like a toes in on an assessment, like meaning parallel feet. So in this case, this guy's got his toes turned out. I would ask this guy to keep his toes turned in, and I just would want to observe and see what happens. And this basically reveals it very much any mobility or hidden stiffness that you would not see if you asked him to do it how he normally does it. And usually you're going to observe it at the ankle and the hip. However, when I'm doing training and when I'm especially with load, I'm going to most times advise toes out unless the person has incredible mobility and doesn't need to. In a perfect world, like we would all love to have parallel feet, but as we all know, it's not a perfect world. So having a blanket rule saying everyone must go toes in is not wise at all. All right, so why are the toes advised to be out? So why do we say that for the load? Well, basically it just gives the mechanical advantage. So the wider base of support for starters just means you're more stable. And doesn't challenge your pelvic control and the mobility to its absolute limit. So you're sort of like still challenging it, but you've given it a little bit of a helping hand, which then allows you to get the depth that you wouldn't be able to get, and you would do it definitely without pinching into the hip or around the ankle as well. It's a much more comfortable way to squat, and a person who's sort of forcing through this is always going to get injured. So we've all got different types of anatomy, and this is very true for the hips and the pelvis, which I'll show you in a second. Meaning that some people just simply are never designed to do deep squats or squats with big load, or even deadlifts for that matter. Doesn't matter how much mobility work you do, you will never be able to get them to ass to grass, or ass to grass, as the Americans would say. So forcing depth with someone who has hip restriction is dangerous, as the person will basically sacrifice the stability at the lower back to do so. So they're just going to round over at the lower back to make up for the fact their hip just can't provide what they're asking them to do. So if we look at the different hip anatomies, which I mentioned a second ago, and this is taken from a video of Stuart McGill's lecture from, I think it was a thing with Gray Cook from 6-7 years ago. This is a great, and he's actually referenced it from Paul Grelly here. So this just gives you some examples of like some different types of hip anatomy, where there's a different femurs and the ball in the socket. See how this sits differently. This person's going to have a restricted lateral movement. These different, see how these are sitting in the ball and socket. People are going to struggle versus this person. Deep squat but poor sprinting power, shallow roof for deep squat. So see how like all of these sort of will greatly influence on your ability to go into those ranges, and some people just are not designed for that. However, they will have incredible power for like lunging and kicking things and stuff like that. So the person who's terrible at squatting is usually great at lunging and kicking stuff, and the person who's great at squatting usually not so good at the other. All right, so that's one thing to bear in mind when you're really looking at squat mechanics as such. Does this mean you can't work on it? Absolutely not. You still can keep trying, because maybe it's an ankle restriction, not so much your hip restriction, and that's the other big factor here. And that's has a lot to do with many things. Previous ankle sprains for a start, and so many people have had them. Poor foot stability from shoes, poor motor control, a lot of factors. You can look at our other videos on foot and ankles to see all the different factors that contribute to stiffness around the ankle. But if you lose your dorsiflexion here, there's no way you can get that angle and So you're going to have to turn your toes out, not because of your hip, but because your ankle just can't give you that angle to be able to squat at that range without beating up your lower back. All right, so if you lose it here, you're going to really restrict yourself through the lower back here. All right, so yeah, that's why you have to continually work on them. That's where we say we might use the assessment to sort of put people in a parallel stance to observe what we see, and it might reveal where the problem is really lying, and that's where you can go to work, and you may be able to improve things to a point where you can go full range with no problem. So let's take a quick look at a video of Nathan doing the squat, and he's a good squatter himself, but he will always train toes out, and he has some foot and ankle issues. No pain there, just has some stiffness around his feet that he's working on, but that sort of really restricts his squat, and it gets very uncomfortable for him if he tries to do it that way. So let's take a quick look at that. Let's have a look at Nathan do a couple of squats where I've asked him to keep his feet quite parallel. So let's have a look at what he does. He normally prefers his feet turned out. All right, and this squat's not too bad, knowing that Nathan can easily do squats of 120 kilo plus normally. And we just have a quick look here. If I just take you back to where his feet are positioned, and you can get an idea of, like you can already see he's already turned one of his feet out a bit anyway. Even though I asked him to keep them dead straight, you can see where he mechanically wants to just turn, especially this left one, just wants to turn it out that little bit. If I keep playing it, you'll sort of see, and I'll show you what it looks like when he does what he wants to do in a second. And I asked him to hold it here, and we can sort of have a look at how he's sort of a little bit restricted. Then he comes down, we could do another one. And you'll see here from a side-on angle, especially when I asked him to go down that little bit lower to get to the depth that you see, because he's stopping earlier than he would like to because he just feels restricted. And you can see here what happens when he goes that little bit lower, how now he starts to create like he loses his lumbar curve. His feet are sort of really straining because they just can't get that dorsiflexion that he's looking for. And that's why he's turning them out, to try and find a mechanical way of getting lower. So his feet are going to turn out first, and then he's going to flex his spine. Because I've taken away this one, I've taken his cheating off him from here. He's now going to have to cheat excessively through there. So what happens when I allow him to do what he wants to do? So he'll come up now, and we'll have a look at him do his squat as the way he would prefer, where he'll take like a wider stance as well, just only a smidge, so it's not a lot. Turn his feet out that little bit. Now his ankles and his hip have a lot more mobility to move the way he wants to do, and his knees will actually feel better too. So he'll have a much better control. And have a look at him from side on here, and all the problems that we saw with him restricting his range now just disappeared. So now he's got his lumbar curve. He's actually a little bit deeper than he was. He's maintaining his good alignment through the knees and the ankle. All we really did was just helped him through this problem at this joint here, through his ankle, and now he doesn't beat up his lower back or reduce his range. All right, so does that mean that you should only ever do squats like that? Well, not for everyone. It just depends. Some people have that range, other people don't. It's a good thing to actually test it when it's parallel to see if you do have the restriction. And if you do, you should be working on it, and Nathan does. So eventually one day he will be able to go parallel. All right, but at the moment he's just going to have him turned out that little bit just to give him that freedom to move and ensure that he doesn't risk injury to his back. So he would train that way, but he would be doing assessing and mobilizing to try and get to that. All right, so you can't sort of force it. You can't just say to everyone you have to keep him in. In a perfect world you would, but very rarely do we see that someone can. All right, if they try to, then they basically sacrifice their lower back and other joints and put everything in a poor position to do so. All right, so that's a good example of whether to go toes in or toes out. All right, so hope you enjoy that. All right, so I hope you enjoyed taking a look at Nathan's squats there. Now, just to finish this video off, the thing where it really gets confusing is with where I've said go toes out on a 2-leg squat. With a single leg squat, we would not say that. That would be a complete disaster. The worst thing you can do is turn this foot out on a single leg squat, as you would see here, and this is what's known as miserable malalignment, and that's where the knee sort of getting forced in. This is where common to ACL injuries. So as that foot plants and that toe turns out, this knee's going to be driving in as the tibia is going that way, and that's just a horrible position, and you just obviously you've just lost complete lower limb alignment there. All right, so you don't really want to train that at all with a single leg squat. So it sort of counters exactly what we just said with a 2-leg squat, that we do want it, but in this one we don't want it. All right, so foot planting, as we just discussed then, this is like a drill for a cutting move. If this foot turns out at any point and he's trying to go back this way, that is going to be a horrible position for that knee, because basically his foot is going this way, but he really wants to be driving that way, and he is going to come around through the hip over the knee to come through there, and that is where we would see, because of an ankle restriction or just poor coordination, that this person does not understand that that foot needs to be firmly planted in and really get good dorsiflexion at the ankle. And this would be, say, as you would see hit this girl here, she's about to plant that foot to cut back on a crossover move in basketball. If that toe turns out, that is a disaster waiting to happen. All right, so in the case of this movement, the stability of the knee is what's sacrificed in order to produce the sideways movement, and that's what you'll end up with. All right, so as much as we want 2-leg squats with toes out, we want single leg squats with neutral stance. The hip mechanics on the single one, because it's not locked up and the leg's trailing behind, if I go back here, see that leg, it doesn't load up the hip like it does with a 2-leg squat. You have a lot more freedom because this leg can get out of the way and that pelvis can rotate forward still. Huge amount of glute strength versus more still in the 2 legs as well, but not so much as in this one. All right, so that's the main difference, but this one really needs perfect alignment through ankle, knee and hip in a forward moving direction, not an outward moving direction. All right, so a big difference between the 2 squats. Now if you want more information about these, you can go to our website. There's stacks of programs, free reports, new report on ACL injury. We're going into great detail about squatting and cutting movements and mechanics of foot plant and all that sort of stuff. So if you're someone playing sports, I'd highly recommend getting this. Obviously it's a thing that's been a hot topic of late, which is why we're releasing some of these videos for you. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed that, and we'll see you on our next video.